On November 14th, 2025, Oxford PhD student Juliet Turner made what she thought was a casual, celebratory post on social media. She announced that she had passed her Viva exam, her thesis on the evolution of cooperation in insects had been accepted. She was now officially an Oxford doctor. In response, masculinity coach and guy with very cold fingers, Richard Cooper, responded by tweeting, "Just look at the degree on that chick," said no man ever. That got 21 million views. Well, who better to help us just look at the degree on that chick than the good doctor herself, Dr. Juliet Turner. Dr. Turner, how are you doing? You've had some adventures on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. It has been crazy, really unexpected and strange response to my Viva.
I've worked on the internet now for 15 years, and my goal is to make stuff that goes viral, right? I've never had anything go as viral as that post. You've outdone my entire career in one post, which is pretty amazing.
Completely unintentionally.
It really was wild. I mean, I've just shown the audience the first tweet that really exploded, but later on today we'll go over some of the other ones. It is incredible that you become such a lightning rod. Your work is on the evolution of superorganisms. So, ant colonies in certain species, bee colonies in certain species. There is your thesis, the evolution of cooperation and division of labor in insects. And then there is the paper that came out of that. We're going to talk about both of these today. I found especially those first two chapters. It was the chapter on the first chapter on cooperation and the evolution of cooperation, and then the second chapter on division of labor. I'm very excited for that to start to go public because I think that's some of the best writing I've read on that. And I'm excited that you've got this big, unexpected, explosion of attention online. Like, we're going to use that to help people understand how evolution works. So that's awesome.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say. I'm glad it was readable. You kind of, I think when you're doing a thesis, you get so lost in the details that it can be hard to keep sight of what it's like for someone else to come in and try to interpret it.
I want to talk about superorganisms. Like, what exactly is a superorganism? And then I think a lot of people, even me, I mean, I understand this stuff. I teach biology online. But for me, a lot of times, whenever I think of superorganisms, whenever I think of eusocial insects, I think of honeybees, where you've got, one queen, you've got a handful of drones, the male drones that are just used for breeding, and then you've got an army of female sterile workers. And that is not the case with many, actually, not even with many bee species, right? That's pretty rare even to make bees. But with ants, not all ants fully fit the superorganism definition. So what does and does not count as a superorganism? What do gray areas look like? And then, is there a spectrum?
There is a lot of confusion around defining a superorganism and what's eusocial and what's not eusocial. And in some ways, the superorganism framework and the Eusociality framework are kind of conflicting, and different people go for different ways of viewing things and categorizing things. But basically, the idea of a superorganism is that it represents this additional level of organization above an organism. So if you think about your own body as a cooperating assemblage of cells that forms the individual organism that's you, a superorganism is the cooperating assemblage of organisms, like bees in a bee colony, as you said, honeybees or ants. The conflict is so low and the interests are enough aligned that you have this higher entity where selection can act.
So natural
And
selection is as treating the entire hive as if it were an individual, essentially.
yeah, exactly. This means that you have really extreme forms of division of labor where you have the reproductive queens and then you have the sterile workers. And so you have such a mutual dependence and such efficiency that reproduction itself has become this task that's allocated to only a subset of the individuals. And so it can now only reproduce as this new higher entity.
Yeah.
There are lots of gray areas I mean, it sounds like something that should be very clear to define, but when you dig into it, there is a lot of ambiguity. So as you were saying, most species of bee are solitary, but there are also a good number that cooperate more transiently. And so you can have helper individuals that are largely sterile, but later they might disperse to reproduce. And so if you look at them at just a single point in time, it might seem like you have this germ soma divide, but longer term, that's not really the case.
Explain that, the germ soma divide, because this is
Yeah.
I think this helps people understand, because we are superorganisms. We are a sorry, like,
We're
I mean,
analogous to.
the body it's a bunch of cells, and you've got the body cells and then the germ cells.
The analogy with the germline and the soma is that if you think about yourself as an organism, you have most of your cells are somatic cells, and these are skin cells, eye cells, muscle cells, anything that isn't the sperm cells or the egg cells. And then the somatic cells are not involved in reproduction, and when you die, all of the somatic cells die. And these are analogous to the workers in an ant colony. In contrast to your germline cells, which are the sperm and the egg, and they are the equivalent of the reproductive queens and the males in the ant colonies.
Yeah.
So that's the reproductive divide. And this is the same pattern that you can see across systems that have undergone these major transitions.
Major transitions in individuality.
Yeah.
So I did a video on this years ago with Stuart, is Stuart your advisor, right?
Yep. He's my primary supervisor.
Yeah. I worked with Stuart West on this years ago, and probably I would say the number one question, the number one comment I get is, where do humans fit on this? Like, are human societies, do they count as superorganisms? If not, why not? And even if not, are we heading that way?
I don't think of them as being a superorganism because they don't have obligate mutual dependence on each other between individual humans. I mean, you have some forms of dependence, and you obviously have humans are extremely socially complex, and we do have a very pronounced division of labor into all of our own separate roles in society. But we reproduce independently. We don't have sterile casts. I mean, there are some things you could say, well, what about nuns or monks that that they don't reproduce. They spend their whole lives working for their organization. But the way that this is different to ant colonies, for example, is that the sterile workers in an ant colony are the offspring of the queen. And so these systems evolve through the reproduction of the queen, whereas the systems with the nuns or the monks, they evolve culturally.
Right. It's interesting how complex our systems have gotten just through, I guess, mimetic evolution, through cultural evolution, and how parallel we are in so many ways to ants and bees. But one of the things I try to explain to people in the comment section on these videos is the big difference is that we're not evolving as a single entity. We don't have a sterile class that's evolutionarily stable, right? You can just join another group. There's a little bit of that happens in bees. Like, sometimes you can have hives merge, but it's pretty rare. And humans can actually force that to happen when they're doing beekeeping. But normally, everybody is related to the queen, and maybe it's worth talking about that a little bit. I mean, this is ants, wasps, and bees. They keep evolving these superorganism systems. They keep evolving these systems where there are sterile workers. And again, it's not every bee, it's not every ant. So that must mean that this is evolving and then it's being lost in some cases. Why does it keep evolving in ants, wasps, and bees? What's special about them that's causing this to happen?
This is the source of an ongoing debate. One of the big ideas was haplodiploidy, which is this genetic system that they have. Females have 2 copies of every chromosome, so they're diploid, and the males only have one copy of every chromosome, so they're haploid. So they're haplodiploidy as a species. In groups, this can lead to very, very high relatedness. So in an ant or a bee colony, the workers, who are all female, all sisters usually, would have a relatedness of 75%
Okay.
to each other. So this is higher than in a normal diploid system where you would be 50%, 0.5, share 0.5 of your genes with your siblings. A worker ant in a colony or their offspring would be 0.5 related to them, in contrast to 0.75. So the idea was that you would be selected to help your mother instead of help your own offspring, instead of reproducing. But this is more complicated in practice because those relatedness differences depend on the queen mother being monogamous.
Right.
So she must have mated only once for this to be the case. People are still arguing about whether this works. My supervisor, Stuart West, and my collaborator, Rosa Bonifaci, are working on this at the moment, and they're basically showing that the evidence for haplodiploidy being really crucial in the evolution of eusociality in ants, bees, and wasps is not so straightforward. And this is because although it looks like you have lots of independent transitions within Hymenoptera, these are not really independent because it's all within one clade. And there are lots of other traits that these species could have in common. It's probably more about the ecology, about whether you maximize your inclusive fitness more by staying than by dispersing and having your own offspring. And there are all kinds of things that can influence whether that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. So you just dropped a new term there, inclusive fitness.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what that means. So most people understand quite well how, just normal. It seems that what is natural selection selecting for? It's helping organisms optimize their evolutionary fitness, so their ability to survive and reproduce. But we also have inclusive fitness, which is a broader thing that evolution is up to.
So inclusive fitness is your overall fitness, which includes the direct fitness that you can get by having your own offspring, and also the indirect fitness that you can gain by helping very close relatives that share your genes. So in superorganismal insect colonies, sterile workers are maximizing their indirect fitness by helping their queen to produce more offspring.
If you look at this from a gene's eye view, if you're a gene and you're trying to reproduce, then it actually doesn't matter if you literally make a copy of yourself or cause a copy that already exists in the sibling to reproduce. It's mathematically the same. There is more copies than be spread. So if natural selection is just working on the spreading of these genes, well, you can have organisms that will sacrifice everything to reproduce themselves or sacrifice everything so that their siblings can reproduce. And it's mathematically equivalent. Okay, so let's talk about your paper then, because your paper is coming out very soon, right?
I'm very excited because I've just had a very big chunk of my thesis accepted for publication in Evolution, which is really cool. It should be out very soon, just kind of waiting on the final formatting. But basically, this was all about the evolution of sterility, of worker sterility in ants. As with our previous paper looking at ant worker castes, we are again using a comparative approach. So we're looking at hundreds of different species. We're trying to explain the variation that we see in ants in terms of the divide between the queens and the workers. We already talked a bit about kind of the stereotypical ant colony where you have a reproductive queen and you have all these sterile workers. But in reality, there's a lot more complexity going on. So one of the things that we found when we were looking at all of these species is that actually the majority have workers that still have capacity for reproduction,
Right.
but don't necessarily fulfill that capacity.
Is it a situation where if they're in the presence of the queen, there's pheromones or something stopping their ovaries from developing? Is that one of the things that's going on here?
Yeah, exactly. We characterize the variation, and I've put all of the ants into 4 categories. So you can have species where the workers have full reproductive potential. They can sexually reproduce, they can produce, so that means they can produce diploid female offspring and haploid males. In another category, there are species that can do this, but to a lesser extent than the queen, so they have reduced ovarials. There are species that can't mate, so they can only produce these haploid males, and there are species that can't do any of that. But as you were saying, among the ones that can reproduce, they can also be inhibited by the queen, by the pheromones, or by other workers in the colony.
There's all sorts of policing, right, that you're
Yeah.
talking about in the paper.
Mhm.
So this paper is, like the title is, larger colony size favors greater division of labor between queens and worker ants. And there's some pictures in there of, sometimes in some species of ant, the queen and the workers, they look almost identical, right? And then in other species of ant, what was the most extreme? It was something like,
Yeah, more than 300 times larger the queen is than her daughter. Yeah, you can have really extreme differences. There's very incredible variation in reproductive differences and also in these morphological differences, like in size. So we were basically trying to explain why this variation exists, and then this can tell us more about the evolution of division of labor in general.
larger colony size leads to more division of labor, but why? Why would that be?
So basically there's across biological systems, you see this repeating pattern, this repeating association between larger systems having more division of labor. Larger organisms can have more cell types, do have more cell types. Insect species with larger colonies have more castes. This correlation has been identified and has been known about for a while, but we basically wanted to explore the causality behind that, why that is the case. And so we confirmed that there is this relationship in ants in terms of species with larger colonies have a much greater reproductive divide, greater division of labor. And then we tested a series of causal models to explain why this is the case. And we found that larger colony sizes facilitated the evolution of this divide, of this increased division of labor. So it could have been the opposite that was the case. So it could have been that division of labor, like the efficiency benefits from specialization, allows you to build a bigger colony,
Right.
with more workers.
How do you tease that apart? So the question is, are large populations per colony driving division of labor, so the extreme differences in phenotype of individuals, or are those extreme differences in phenotype driving large populations? And
Yeah.
how do you tease that out in the math? How does that work?
We used ancestral state reconstructions, and so based on the extant variation, the variation in traits that you see of modern species, you can use evolutionary models to reconstruct how this pattern most likely evolved.
So that's
And
that's phylogenetic bracketing then. So you've got several living species, and you look at their shared traits to deduce what the ancestor was like.
yeah, so basically all species are on a phylogenetic tree, and the modern species are at the tips of this tree.
Yeah.
And by looking at the pattern on those tips, you can reconstruct where down the branches further back in evolutionary history, you can figure out the most likely state of this node. And this tells you when the key transitions happened. So, for example, when you had a transition from reproductive potential to sterility in workers, you can basically reconstruct how all of this variation evolved, and you can plot out where the transitions appeared on the evolutionary tree. Sterility might be your response variable, the thing that you're trying to understand, but you also have a few potential predictors. So these are traits that you think will be important in the evolution of sterility, and you can do the same thing with them. You reconstruct them, and then you find out when they transitioned on the evolutionary tree. You can basically see if what happens is that every time you have an increase in colony size, you also have a transition in sterility. And then that can indicate that sterility is evolving because of this transition.
Are you actually able to see that size increases first, then we have sterility? Or do they appear at roughly the same time? Are they co-evolving?
Largely, it's that colonies evolve to be larger, and then this increases the division of labor that we're looking at. We do see some of the reverse. So it seems like although increased colony size is the main driving force, it's kind of like a self-perpetuating
They feed
system.
each other.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, to an extent. So you can evolve even larger colony sizes once you have this increased division of labor. So basically we found this pattern, and we think that the reason is that as a consequence of being much larger, there are way more tasks within the colony that need to be performed. I like to think about leafcutter ants, which are these tropical fungus farming ants in huge complex colonies. I don't know if you've seen videos where they fill the nests with metal and extract them, but it's a good way of showing how huge they can be. And so basically, because that's the case, you often can end up with waste from all of the ants in the colony throughout this nest. And they have a specialized waste disposal team that carry waste out from the center of the nest, and they dispose of it in a landfill site. This is an example of just like an additional task, like something that you have to figure out as a consequence of being such a large system. And it's the same in multicellular organisms. Like you have a specialized waste disposal system. And so that's why we think we're finding this relationship.
Yeah, that's really neat. Okay. Side question. Maybe I should have done this at the start for like a little warm-up questions, but what's the craziest, or maybe some of the craziest castes?
I mean, there are so many to choose from. Ant colonies can have soldiers, they have nurses, they have foragers, they have gardeners that are growing this fungus that they eat. But some of the more obscure things, I mean, there are lots of other insects that also have specialized roles. So something that comes to mind, because I learned about it recently, is some aphids, as they age, they become part of this defensive grandmother role. The older females kind of act as soldiers, and their job is to defend their colony. But yeah, in terms of crazy specializations among ants, there are so many. I mean, there are some species of ant where they've evolved a head that's like the shape of a circular door. They live inside little twigs, and the twigs, they have this round entrance. And the job of this ant is basically to just like sit by the entrance and plug the door with its head. It's just like a living door, and that's all it does, is it just like sits there and blocks the entrance and moves aside to let people in. And
That's amazing.
like really, yeah, I love the
Editor's note, photographer Alex Wild was really kind. He let Juliet use these photos for this interview. He normally sells them for like hundreds of bucks a pop. These images are so amazing. Here we have a normal worker next to a door-headed worker. Here's the door poking out to look around. And here's the door acting as a guard. This is an amazing species. Most of these photos come from a colony that he found in the Florida Keys. But he has amazing photos of these and many other insect species on his website, alexanderwild.com. So, shout out to Alex. And now, back to my conversation with Juliet.
Yeah.
There's the honeypot ants, too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, they're amazing, aren't they? Yeah.
You just store honey, that's it, in your abdomen.
Living food storage barrels.
It's also really interesting how humans can mimic this through such a different way. Through culture, we can mimic this. I mean, without trying. No one's evolved to be a door, but you have people who guard doors. I mean, it's the parallels are quite amazing, which is why I think so many people, when they learn about the evolution of superorganisms, they want to say, oh, humans are a superorganism too. And there are parallels. But how do you feel about trying to take lessons from ants and apply that to human society?
Um,
It's so natural for people to want to do.
I don't think I have an inclination to do that. You know, we're very different systems. I prefer to just marvel at the variation in all species.
I think for the most part, anything we get from them on how to organize our societies, it's more like there's a lot of analogies,
Yeah.
but where these analogies become more than analogy, I think it's really in helping us understand the evolution of multicellularity. Y
Yeah.
it's such a cool thing because you can see it, you don't need a microscope. You don't need to look at chemical reactions, you can see these behaviors of these animals, you can compare different colonies. How much time do you spend actually looking at ants physically?
Not very much anymore. So the beginning of my PhD, we had to collect all of the data that we use to make these databases of thousands of species. And part of this, when we were looking at division of labor, initially among workers and then between queens and workers, we had to measure hundreds and hundreds, thousands of ants. But these were all in images, in digital images. And so we spent a lot of time looking at photos of ants, and then a lot of time since then looking at representations of ants in databases and in models. So not much time playing with real ants, unfortunately. Although I did have the amazing opportunity to travel out to Papua New Guinea
Oh, nice.
a couple of years ago for some field work to kind of bring my ant field identification skills up to scratch. That was really cool. That
And
was really
was that through Oxford?
No, this is something called the Ant Course, which is run by California Academy of Sciences, and they have it in different locations each year. And so I just applied to be on this and to be involved. There are some amazing ant species. Trapjaw ants. We found some really amazing ants, commonly called vampire ants. They have queens that feed on the blood of their brood,
Really?
of their children, basically. And they were really cool to see.
So the workers are feeding the brood, and then the brood is feeding the queen.
I think that's how it works. I would have to yeah, I think that's how it works. It's a very interesting system. I'm not really sure why that was deemed necessary, but
Yeah.
by selection.
I just saw footage of weaver ants, and they will
Mm.
pick up I just always assume that when the ant is in its larval stage, is not doing anything useful, but these ones will pick up the larva and they squeeze them. They use whatever comes out to stitch leaves together. So I think it's a type of silk that they're getting to come out.
Mm.
So these little they look like little maggots, and they'll excrete silk, and they're using it just like a glue gun. It's amazing. So yeah, they found functions even for their own babies. That's
Yeah, I think everyone is put to work in an ant colony. Although having said that, I think there's been research recently that I don't know if this was in ants now or if this was in bees, but someone found that a very large proportion of the workforce just kind of sit around and don't do anything. So we have this, like, idea in mind of, you know, really good work ethic, hyper efficiency, and, a lot of them are just kind of hanging out and not doing all that much. But yeah, but they definitely have some very inventive strategies.
I lived in Brazil for several years, and then now I go to Ecuador I'm about to go in December, but there, I mean, the leafcutter ants, they're so fun to watch, but
Mm.
you'll always find one that's just actually just riding on the leaf, doesn't seem to be doing much of anything. I did find that some people say that, even though the ones that look like they're just hitchhiking, they might be doing something protective because sometimes you'll have a wasp come in and try and attack individuals and lay eggs in them, whatever. So maybe the lazier class is actually doing some sort of security job, but yeah,
Yeah.
it
They're like the reserves. They're reserve soldiers, maybe.
right, right. They're there for when things
Just in case.
when they're needed. So this paper, you've used bracketing to figure out what evolved first.
We used 3 methods to test causality to identify the most likely causal explanation. So we used phylogenetic path analysis, which basically tells you the most likely paths of influence between your variables. We used the ancestral state reconstructions, and we also did Bayes traits tests for correlated evolution. I don't know if this won't mean anything to a lot of people, but basically these are all just different ways that we tried to disentangle potential causal relationships for correlations. And the reason that we did 3 different ones is for robustness. So all models have assumptions, and different models have different assumptions. And so if you just used one approach, you might not be completely confident that this is a real result. It could just be a result of the assumptions of the model. Because we're finding the same pattern across all these different techniques, we're pretty confident that it's our result is robust.
Going into it, it could go either way. It could be that the division of labor causes the increase in size, or the increase in size causes the division of labor. And did you have a hypothesis coming in as to which it was, or was it just like, the thing I'm going to test is which of these was it, and these are the tests I'm going to use to come to that conclusion?
You have to always approach it like you could find anything. But because we had done a project before, which is now in Nature, Ecology, and Evolution, where we found that colony size is the driving force. Larger colony sizes facilitate the evolution of more worker subcastes. Because we'd already found this, it seemed quite likely that it would also be the case when looking at reproductive divide. So I wasn't that surprised by that. But it could have been that when you have higher relatedness among workers in a colony, they're more likely to be cooperative, and so they're more likely to have this division of labor. And we looked at relatedness using 2 proxies. So we looked at the number of queens in a colony and the number of males that the queen mates with. So these are basically the number of mothers and the number of fathers that the workers have.
Yeah.
And this affects whether they're full siblings or less than that. But this just didn't come through as important.
Really?
Like,
Yeah.
sometimes it's like weakly significant, but not in the same way as colony size.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just colony size, the bigger well, okay, I guess the other question is then, what drives colony size? What gets the colony to be larger? I suppose that could be all sorts of things in the environment, and what type of food that they're specializing in, right?
Yeah.
Like if they're
Yeah.
specializing in plant material or fungus, that's gonna be more of a consistent food supply probably than meat, right?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of these more kind of ecological factors will be at play there. This isn't something that we've looked at yet, but it is an obvious next question to explore for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have I know that, like, army ants, for example, they're almost exclusively carnivorous. Then you've got the leaf cutters, which are eating fungus. Uh, what are typical diets of ant species across the board? Are they doing everything, or do they tend to specialize?
Um, I I would say there's a lot of variation. Um, there are species that are purely herbivorous. There are some that are really specific to, for example, eating seeds. There are some that are more carnivorous. There are lots of omnivorous species. There's a lot of variation for sure.
Anything else we should know about this paper before we move on here?
Well, for me, because the relationship with colony size we'd kind of already found before this, so this wasn't so surprising to me, as I said. To me, one of the more surprising and exciting bits was when I did the ancestral state reconstruction to look at the evolution of colony size and sterility. I was able to estimate the number of independent origins of worker sterility and also origins of gains of reproductive potential. And I found that these are much higher than I was expecting.
Really?
So I think when people, I think maybe there were like 17 independent origins of complete sterility, which is much higher than I think people would generally expect. Because when
That's
people talk
just
about
in ants.
yeah, just in ants. So when people talk about ants, they talk about the workers are sterile.
Yeah.
And they talk about how ants are a clade and they're all, well, they're supposedly all superorganismal, and so that you think they had one transition to this state of
Right.
worker sterility right at the base of their clade. But by doing this reconstruction, I found that there are a lot more transitions. There are lots of origins of sterility, and there are also gains of reproductive potential.
They're evolving sterility, and then they're losing it, and then evolving it again and losing it.
Yeah.
And for
So
some reason, they're set up for that, or that's easy for them to evolve back and forth through this.
I don't know if we can say it's easy, but it definitely has happened, and more times than we might expect.
Yeah.
And it also kind of, yeah, it calls into question a bit more so before you were asking about gray areas with superorganismality, and I didn't actually get to your point about how some ants are a bit ambiguous, but
Yeah.
that's completely right. There are lots of species of these more like basally divergent ants that have workers with full reproductive potential, and these are called gamegate workers. And in fact, many of them have completely lost their queen caste. So they kind of transition to superorganismality, and then they no longer seem like they are superorganismal, because basically you have very small colonies with reproductive workers and no queens, and these workers all just battle for reproductive dominance.
They battle each other.
Yeah, they fight very, very aggressively, and then it's just kind of like a hierarchy. And so this is not what you would think of if you're thinking of a superorganismal colony.
When you say a smaller colony, are we talking about like 10? Are we talking about 200 or?
It can be about 10.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. Really
So
very small.
there's 10, it's males and females in a group, or?
Talking about the colonies, I'm just thinking about the females, the workers and the dominant reproductive in this case. But yeah, they would also be producing males that would disperse and mate with other queens.
But I mean, they're forming packs that seem like as small as a wolf pack, right?
Yeah, I spoke to Koos Boomsma, who's been a strong proponent of the superorganismality framework. He's written a lot of good stuff, kind of outlining how we should think about superorganisms, basically. And now I have to get this right, because I asked him about these because I was talking to him about my work. Are these really superorganisms, and can we really say there's one origin of superorganismality? And I think he was saying these are reversals from the superorganismal state, but not reversions. I think that's the way around that he stressed. And now there's a slight difference in the terminology there. Basically, the implication is just that you don't want to imply that the arrangement that they have now was their ancestral state. You don't know that that's the case. So it's like they're not superorganisms now, but they haven't reverted back to an ancestral state.
Right.
So when people talk about superorganisms, they often say it's an irreversible transition. And so technically these haven't reversed. There's a lot of complexity, and I hope that by kind of mapping out this complexity and counting these transitions, we can maybe look at things a bit differently and try to figure out how to view them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he's concerned about. I mean, it'd be interesting to have him here to talk about. But maybe he's concerned about people saying this is the ancestral state,
Yeah.
because if you have a split before the superorganism evolved, then you actually might have kind of a glimpse of the ancestral state. Of course, it's been evolving since then too. Is that what he's trying to get us to avoid thinking? Like,
Well, for a long time there, and still in some cases, there was this idea that you evolve these really complex systems through like a social ladder. So
yeah,
on a kind of a ladder of increasing complexities, and you have to go through all these intermediate stages. So you start off evolutionarily, you're solitary, and then you would evolve into something slightly more social, and then something more social, and eventually you become a superorganism. But we don't know that that's the case. This is something that you have to actually test.
yeah,
You can't just assume that's the case. It could be that you can evolve straight from this state into this state and bypass the intermediate stages. So you have to be really careful when you're talking about things to not imply a certain evolutionary order. And I try to look at that a bit in this paper. So as I said, I have these 4 categories of the reproductive potential of the ant workers.
right,
And you could think, oh, you start off with full reproductive potential and then you evolve to lose it a bit and then you lose more and eventually you become sterile and you have to go through these intermediate stages. That's not necessarily the case. So this was another thing that I looked at. And I did find in the end that it happens in a mostly sequential pattern, although it goes both ways down this, up and down the ladder, basically.
they can become more social or less social.
It often does happen that you go through intermediate stages of reproductive potential in this case. You can sometimes skip ahead. I found that there were some transitions that did happen quite often, which I think was from the state of full reproductive potential to none at all. But it could just be that maybe you go through all the intermediate stages really quickly
Right.
and it appears like it was a single step. But overall, the transitions that are happening are between these neighboring states that are
Yes.
more similar to each other, which makes sense. But whether we can apply that to the evolution of superorganismality more broadly is something we'll have to look at specifically, I think.
There's a couple of really interesting cases with multicellular animals. So there's a type of cancer that Tasmanian devils get where they can pass it from one to the other. And some people have said we should call this it's a new species. It's a new species of Tasmanian devil, but it's just globs of cells. There's a dog cancer that does the same thing, and then HeLa cells in culture. So these are human cervical cancer cells. They've been starting to infect laboratories, and they're getting into other, petri dishes and so on. And some people say, well, we should consider this its own organism now because it's now evolving, surviving, and reproducing on its own and getting into new. So we have you could say, a reversion to, I don't know if you'd call this a single-celled organism because they are colonies, but it's a human species. It's a new human species. Some people are trying to argue that
It's
it's
really interesting.
single-celled.
I had a really similar conversation about this, like exactly the same with Richard Dawkins, who's at my college in Oxford, about this, and it's really interesting. And also, I think one of the more kind of compelling cases of this being a kind of transition away from a multicellular system. There are some species of clams where you have cancers that can move between different species.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so it's not even just between individuals. It's like transmissible across species.
A pathogen has evolved from an organism. That's really
Yeah.
cool. And it's,
Yeah, I think it's super cool.
yeah.
I think I'm hesitant saying this because some people have very strong views about the technical details of major transitions being irreversible, but there are definitely some cases that you need to you need to stop and look and think about.
Things will evolve if they can.
Yeah.
They're not following a rule book. But I would say that there's debates about this when we look at RNA viruses, for example.
Mm.
Are these things, do they trace their lineage all the way back to like an RNA world? I doubt it. I doubt most of them do. And most of them, I'm sure, have escaped from cells. They're,
Mm.
glands of RNA that have escaped from cells. So, of course, we can have these. To me, it seems weird to think that that would not be possible. So,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and also, like I said, with some of these Gamergate ant species, you can lose the queen caste, and not all species with reproductive workers have lost their queen caste, but some of them have. And so it's like losing your germline. It's like you suddenly don't have sperm or egg cells anymore, and your somatic cells, kind of take over and start battling for dominance and like fighting over who can go on to produce the next generation. It's a really crazy situation. But that happens. There are species of termites that I think had multiple castes of worker, like morphologically distinct castes, and they've subsequently lost some of them. So that you can have these losses of complexity as well, for sure.
yeah, yeah. I mean, of course we can. Whales have lost their legs, right? We can. There's no. There's no. Uh, Arrow that things have to follow forever, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, people always think there's like you become more evolved, get better and better, and you get more and more complex, but it's much messier than that. It's much more, there's a lot of moving around, and there are different strategies that work in different conditions, and
Right.
it can go in any direction.
Yeah, future humans won't necessarily be smarter than modern humans.
Yeah.
Uh, all right, well, shall we? So we talk about the Twitter.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, let's what to say about that?
Look at the degree on that chick, said no one ever. And
Yeah,
that
that
thing
no
got
man
21 million views or something on that tweet.
Oh, really? That's crazy. Yeah, I think before then it was, it was the usual kind of congrats, well done.
Yeah.
There were some comments of people being like, "Oh, well, I don't care." But then this kind of brought it up to another level. I don't know. I'm not really sure what the manosphere is. I'm hearing this word a lot now, but it seems to be a subculture of influencers
Mhm.
providing advice on masculinity and femininity and our respective roles in society. And yeah, somehow my DPhil Viva photo ended up in this realm. And basically, I was informed that having a doctorate is not attractive to men. Not that anyone ever asked for. This was not my motivation for pursuing a PhD.
Yeah, it was just amazing. I've never seen something like you were like a lightning rod for some reason for this entire culture of incels to just go nuts. Like I think it's yeah, like Marilyn and I were looking at this like what is going on with people? Like what is the psychology here? And I mean, I think it's like I mean, you know, I don't wanna pretend to know all the types of people that are doing this, but for the most part, I think we can be pretty confident that it's a bunch of guys that can't get a girlfriend that are angry about that, and
Mhm.
they've seen someone just go into, like, even more out of their league than before, and they're angry. I think it might just be as simple as that. They're just angry.
When you achieve something, it can make people um, aware of their own insecurities and maybe their own kind of disappointments and that sort of thing. But it took on a very weird, like it became very much a narrative of like men versus women in a strange way. And it was, you know, a lot of the hate mail that I was receiving was to do with like, I'm wasting my life pursuing a doctorate. I should be reproducing.
Right.
Um,
Yes. Someone tweeted it was just a picture of an empty egg carton.
I'm getting a lot of them. There's a lot of, you know, I've been thinking about this more recently. And I actually think it's like karma. It's karma for all of the work that I've done with ants. Because I've spent the last 4 years, um, you know, studying and picking apart the reproductive lives of ants, of female ants, and like you know, quantifying their reproductive choice, yeah, their reproductive success and capacity. And so it makes complete sense that this is now happening to me. And I think really it's only fair that it has. But it was definitely very unexpected anyway.
I don't know if fair is the right word, but it's oh man. I also the other weird thing about this too is you kind of want to know it is this really a real concern that our society actually has, is that women are going to school now for longer, or is this fake because you've got we know that Elon Musk, who runs Twitter, is hyper pronatalist, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
And he's saying all this stuff. I mean, is this something in the algorithm that he's pushing into anyone who's trying to drive this stuff home? Because I've seen at least one of the accounts that was attacking you, it seems totally fake. It was like Swifties for Trump or something.
Oh, yeah, they were persistent, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I did wonder, I mean, a lot of these some of these accounts are definitely real
Yeah,
because they're public figures or they have accounts older than, um, you know,
the AI stuff.
AI,
Yeah.
yeah, the AI stuff. And some of them also contact me on other platforms, so there are definitely a lot of real people.
Mhm.
But there could also be a lot of bots,
Yeah.
and I do think there is real concern about birth rates.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think some of it's genuine concern, a lot of it's just trolling.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, people are just experiment like, how can I say something that's gonna be maximally offensive? Uh, yeah. It's just classic trolling. But I do think
yeah.
that's interesting because there's a genuine tension, especially it seems in the UK, about,
Mm.
birth rates and about immigration, and all of those concerns are being thrown on you as well. It's
Yeah.
I mean, lightning rod is it's just like you're getting it from all these directions all at once.
Yeah, I don't know, it's interesting that you say that's more of a UK thing because I kind of got the impression that this was more of an American, phenomenon, and I was, you know, saying to people that I've got wrapped up in these kind of more American politics, but I suppose maybe it's probably just an more of an online thing
Yeah, yeah.
that's being, you know, whipped up into more of a concern. I think it's strange because it kind of relies on some core principles that are quite flawed. One of them being if you get a PhD as a woman, you can't have children. That just isn't true. Um, you know, so I mean, to be honest, if you speak to academics, they probably agree that there's more of a problem of like academics produce more academics. A lot of people in academia are from academic families.
Right.
And I'm one of them.
Mm,
Both of my parents are evolutionary biologists.
not really.
So they both have PhDs, you know. It is possible to have a PhD and self-replicate. Um, and you know, if you really speak to real academics, you know this is true. I mean, they're reproducing all the time. I don't
Yeah, yeah,
know. This is just like a flawed, like it's a core uh
yeah.
pillar in the argument, and it just is flawed. You know, they can say maybe it's lower, but
It's insane. I mean, really, I think it's just jealousy. People not mate guarding, which, there's all sorts of aggressive mate guarding in humans and other animals, but dating pool guarding or something, something
Yeah,
of
I
this
think
nature that's happening.
there's another flawed thing there, a flawed idea there, which is, the idea that the women that are going into academia and getting PhDs would have liked them anyway. They would have liked him if they hadn't got their PhD, is the idea. And now because they have their PhD, they won't be attracted to them. I think, based on the impression I get of their personalities and general demeanor, probably they wouldn't have been top choices to begin with.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's necessarily true that, you don't need to have a PhD if you're a nice person, you have shared interests, these just feel like very chronically online
Oh, yeah.
perspectives.
Yeah. And then it becomes like a contest as to who can make the funniest joke about it or who can make the most offensive post about it. Who can get so it's a weird phenomena. It's not something I was telling Stuart. I was like, you know, do check in on her because our brains are not built for this. Like we're not built for millions of people to be talking about us. Like it
Yeah.
is unnatural. Like I was saying, for me, even if I do something that goes viral for all the right reasons, it's still it's very stressful. I mean,
Yeah.
it's usually it's good stress. I mean, you're getting tons of positive feedback too. I mean, I think this is gonna be really helpful in your career as far as outreach goes. I mean, people know your name now. So, like the world knows your name. You've got 21 million people who watch that now, and they're sharing it with each other at breakfast and talking about it and having
Yeah.
all
No,
these weird side conversations that we're having right now about it. It's
yeah.
it's cool in many ways, but it's also stressful. Even when it happens positively, it's stressful and it's just distracting. So it's a
Yeah.
weird thing, the internet.
Yeah, I mean, there a lot of it has been, I just found it really funny,
Yeah.
and I basically I just enjoy learning about things, and so like the way I viewed it is like a flood of information coming towards
Oh
me.
yeah.
How often do you get to know what several million people think about you, or like what all of these people think about your research and all the questions they have?
Mhm.
And to me, that was just amazing. Like that's a really cool opportunity. I just like whether it's criticisms or compliments, it's just
Yeah.
really nice and exciting to have all of this feedback and have this information. And it's really cool to connect with so many people that are genuinely interested in my research.
Mhm.
And in some ways, it's kind of reignited the passion I have for it. And it's not like I ever lost it, but towards the end of a PhD, it kind of grinds on a bit, and you end up repeating some things again and again and again, and because you keep thinking, oh, we haven't considered this, we need to control for this, making a very slight thing, repeating again. This gets quite tedious, and you can get a bit sick of it. It was quite nice that once I finished, then had this opportunity to have so much interest in it and to have so many questions about it. And
Yeah, yeah, it's kinda like a giant celebration. I mean,
yeah,
one of the interesting things that I also saw in this was, and I don't know how much this fueled the attention too, is the anti-evolution crowd was also playing in there. It wasn't a whole lot that I saw, but it was, and I also wonder how much of that is underneath some of this because a lot of people, especially if you're saying you're getting a lot of attacks from Americans, in America, it's a lot of creationist anti-evolution stuff. So it's
Mm.
like, I guess extra triggering for that crowd to see.
I don't know if I saw many of them. I'm not surprised that they kind of joined in on the hate piling, but yeah, I mean, it was really weird. There were all kinds of different angles that people were taking in opposition to me and my work. And some of it was like evolution isn't real. Some of it is women shouldn't be in education. Some of it is ants are like a waste of time. Why are you studying ants? Why don't you're not a real doctor unless you're a physician. And
Yeah, that's it.
so
And I love that you put doctor Yeah.
Yeah.
My thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't going to do that, but I'm a contrarian at heart, and so
Yes.
when people are telling me that I'm not a doctor, but I completed my PhD, then I'll, you know, I am.
Well, Dr. Turner, thank you for coming on. This is awesome.
Yeah, thank you so
We're
much.
gonna a lot of people are gonna learn about bugs now, about superorganisms, and I'm excited. I'm really really excited for this the thesis to go public. That'll be just like public. Where will they be
Yeah.
able to find it?
Yeah, I might, well, it'll be posted publicly by Oxford, by our libraries, online, and I'll probably end up sharing the PDF of it if I can. I don't know if I can do that on Twitter, on X, but I'll have a look. Might end up regretting that, but
Well,
yeah, I'll share it somewhere.
you'll have to do an extra spell check.
I'm sure there will be lots of mistakes in there, hopefully only small things, but I'm sure people will let me know.
Well, like I said, I mean, just those first 2 chapters are the best writing that I've read on this topic. It's just so clear, no BS, nothing added in there. It's just very clear, very good. So I'm excited that a bunch of people are gonna read it now. For whatever their motivation might be, they're gonna read some good stuff.